All right, we are now recording and on YouTube, and then I'll go through and mute anyone. So if you want to speak, you'll just have to unmute yourself. All right, ready when you are, Chair Blythe.
Okay, we'll call the March 2nd meeting of the Historic Review Board to order at 7:02 p.m. First, we'll accept any public comments not related to items on the agenda this evening. Do we have any? I don't think so. Okay, without any comments not related to items on the agenda, then we'll move into the public hearing portion of the agenda for this evening. So 2 public hearings on land use applications are scheduled tonight, and 1 hearing on a land use policy. Our role is to conduct the public hearing and to make decisions about the matter before us. In making those decisions, we must apply the applicable codes and laws and cannot vary from or change those laws or codes. Members of the Historic Review Board are to be unbiased. Before the start of the hearing, I will ask the board members whether they have any potential conflicts, such as family, financial, or business relationships with any of the applicants or with regard to the land in question. I will also ask whether any of the board members have discussed the application in question with any of the parties or have independent knowledge of relevant facts, such as from a visit to the site in question. Any member of the audience may question any board member about their disclosures. A staff report has been prepared for application and has been made available to the public 7 days before the first public hearing. The staff report identifies the approval criteria that apply to each applicant's proposal. Staff has analyzed the criteria which are contained in the staff report. The quasi-judicial hearing procedure that the board will follow is set out in state law and the Oregon City Municipal Code. The hearing procedure steps are shown on the chart that no one can see because they're not in there. Anyone wishing to speak should fill out a speaker's card and email it to the planning staff before the hearing. Speakers will proceed in the order in which their card is received. You should fill out your address on the card so the city will notify you of its final decision. For the public record, please begin all testimony stating your name and city of residence. Testimony and evidence should be directed toward the applicable approval criteria. If you believe any other criteria would apply in addition to those addressed in the staff report, identify and discuss those criteria and explain how and why you believe they apply to the application under consideration. Any person may submit written material while the public record is open on each application. Any written materials received by the city staff during the time period in which the record is open will be placed in the record. Written materials submitted during the public hearing must be presented to the city staff in order to become part of the record. If a person intends for PowerPoint presentations, reports, pictures, or other exhibits used in their oral testimony to be placed in the record, copies must be submitted to the city staff while the record is open. If they are not given to staff, they will not be included in the record. Any person wishing a continuance to present additional evidence or testimony or to keep the record open to respond to new evidence must make that request before the public testimony portion of the hearing is closed. If the Historic Review Board makes a decision with which you disagree, any issue that you may wish to appeal must have been raised on the record for the consideration of the City Commission or LUBA or both. Without raising the issue on the record with sufficient detail and accompanied by statements or evidence that the city and all parties can respond to the issue will not be deemed appealable to the City Commission or State Land Use Board of Appeals. In addition, the failure of an applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Okay. Moving into the first public hearing. Now we will open the record for Oregon City File GLUA 00007, HR 21-00006, Historic Review Board for alterations to the Eli store at 1019 7th Street. Does any board member have any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, bias, or any other statements to declare? Board members, you can respond with a no or yes or other.
No.
No, none for me.
And Paul?
No.
Okay, thank you. And have any of the board members visited the site?
Yes.
Yeah, I've also walked around.
Yes.
Okay, and I have as well. And also, I do not have any conflicts of interest in regard to this application. And does anyone in the audience wish to question any of the board members about these disclosures? Okay, we'll now commence with the staff report.
Thank you, Chair Blythe. I'm Kelly Reed, planner with Oregon City. I will give the staff report and recommendation, and I'm going to share my screen. Laura, if you could give me the permissions to do that, that'd be. Thank you. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is an application for alterations to a designated structure. Ely, I believe it's pronounced Ely, is an existing commercial building in the McLaughlin Conservation District. And although it's been significantly altered, it is still designated. So we have a historic photo from 1903, circa 1903. The photo that I included in the staff report it looks very similar, but it had a wing on the right side of the building. And it is actually not the same building. Apparently there were two Ely stores, and the one that I included in the staff report was across the street, literally across 7th Street from this one. And I got that from Karen Morey, so I feel like it's probably correct. So this is the right photo. And a lot of, so it has the false front design, and a lot of buildings of this era along 7th Street were built in this style. So if you see any historic photos of buildings that look like this, it's not necessarily the Ely store. It could have been one of several, I think. So the building as it looks today, has been greatly modified. The roofing has been replaced, metal roof. We've got asbestos tile siding. The decorative elements on the front have been replaced or covered over. Windows were changed. And then the ground floor storefront was changed to put the door on the corner, add some brick, and chamfer the corner there. And the awning, of course, is different as well. So this building has been really highly modified at some point over the years. And the applicant is proposing to, for the most part, restore it to how it looked with a few little tweaks to kind of modernize it a little bit and make it more usable. And I'll let the applicant explain more about kind of their design decisions and their goals for the building. But I'll skip over kind of that, but here's the drawing, the front elevation. So the applicant's proposing to relocate the ground floor entrance to 7th Street, kind of right in the middle where it was originally. So it would be located away from the corner where it is now, adding storefront window system, modifying the single story wing to also have a new entry and storefront window. The asbestos siding would come off and be replaced with fiber cement horizontal siding. Some vertical siding and decorative shingles would be added again to the front false front area at the top, and the gable roof behind it. The brackets up there would be retained, and then the windows would be replaced with appropriately sized historic windows. And the applicant is proposing that these be vinyl clad wood on the front. On the side, the siding would again be replaced. The windows, which are all vinyl replacements or aluminum, I think, would be replaced where necessary with vinyl windows as proposed. The awning here is a little bit different from the original awning and from the current awning. And the part of the proposal is also to wrap it around the corner of the building there and then add another small awning on near the back end for a third storefront entry. So there are a few changes to the rear and the other side that's much less visible from the street, and I'll let the applicant talk about those. The window replacement, so that's a typical window on the building, vinyl. And so, for the most part, we're going from vinyl to vinyl on the sides. And then on the front, where the proposal is to go from the vinyl to vinyl clad wood. So I just forwarded an email from the applicant with with this image, along with the product brochures for these windows that are listed here, the Pella, Geldwin, Anderson. So you can kind of get an idea of what that might look like. I did look at those brochures, and it's difficult to tell exactly, because you can't see it in person, what that window will look like, especially that vinyl clad. I think we all kind of know what vinyl windows will look like, but the vinyl clad wood, it's hard to tell exactly what that would look like based on the brochure, but maybe the applicant can speak to that a little bit. And so I want to apologize for changing things on you, but I would like to revise my recommended conditions of approval. I think, the Secretary of Interior standards apply, and for the vast majority of this project, the applicant's done a fantastic job of meeting the Secretary of Interior standards and our design guidelines for alterations. But I do have a few conditions, and one is there is one or a couple of wood windows that are remaining on the interior side of the building. It sounded like those were of uncertain condition, and so the applicant wanted to replace them with vinyl so that the upper floor could be consistent throughout with vinyl windows. I think as staff, I can never really recommend replacing a wood window. So I think that so this condition is to require that kind of more due diligence is taken on those, where documenting those with close-up photos, obtaining a cost estimate for repair, and then potentially that might lead to repairing it rather than replacing it if the cost estimate for repair is reasonable, and it's feasible to repair those. I want to remove the second condition. I think I was just wrong about the relocation. I think it was a misunderstanding. So I want to strike condition number 2. And then for number 3 is if the ornamental shingle siding that's on the front facade, kind of the upper level of the building, if that is actually underneath the asbestos tile siding, I think we don't know. But if it's there, then I say this condition would require it to be retained and restored, even if it's in poor condition. A condition to retain the 6 brackets on the false front facade. I think the applicant proposed to do that, but there was a little bit of uncertainty as to the feasibility of that or the cost of that. And so I think that should be a requirement. If new ornamental shingles will be required on the front, if those old ones are gone, then I want to see more details about what those look like so that we can compare them to the historic photo. And that's something that I can do as staff, so the HRB wouldn't have to look at it again. And then, of course, number 6, the applicant shall utilize smooth fiber cement siding, not the textured kind. That's a typical condition that we've seen before. And then the last one I want to add, that's why it's highlighted. And the board, I'd like direction from the board on this one, actually. I think, when there's a vinyl window and the applicant wants to replace it with vinyl, I think the board, has the discretion to approve that. But as staff, I'm going to be a little bit more conservative and adhere more closely to the design guidelines and suggest that the windows on the front be fiberglass clad or aluminum clad wood rather than vinyl clad wood. And that goes for the street facing corner side as well. Marvin Integrity is a brand that that the board in the past has approved as a fiberglass window that is of equivalent quality to a aluminum clad wood window. And so there might be other brands out there that offer the same quality. And so I would just compare if the applicant found one that's not Marvin Integrity, we can compare that and make sure that the appearance is of high quality. And I am available for any questions as well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Does the board have any questions for Kelly on the staff report?
No.
Yeah, I'm good.
And Paul?
I still question this vinyl windows and going vinyl like that. Fiberglass has always been fiberglass or fiberglass clad wood has always been our minimum. It's and it's stepping away from that minimum is difficult. And I just think that we need to have more information, because at this point, I don't find that as an acceptable alternative in most any case. It's just, it's almost precedent setting. And this is something we have historically not done. So my comment on the windows.
Okay, thank you, Paul. On that note, then we'll move on to the public testimony portion for this hearing. So we'll have 15 or up to 15 minutes for the applicant, 5 minutes for representatives of recognized neighborhood associations, government agencies, or other incorporated public interest organizations. Up to 3 minutes for individuals, and then up to 5 minutes for any applicants' rebuttals. And of course, you don't have to use the maximum time allotted to you. So on that note, we'll go to the applicant, and perhaps since it sounds like we already have questions regarding the vinyl windows, if you can maybe be sure to address that in your testimony, if you could.
And quick question, Chair Blythe, would you like me to time or do a timer for all the testimony and that kind of stuff? Through the hearing?
I think, how many, do we have a lot of comments, Kelly, for this application?
I've not received any submissions for comments on this item.
Okay, in that case, I think we're probably okay. Mark.
This is Jessica Iceland, the architect for the project, and I'd just like to, I guess, start. Dave and Vicky, would you like to give any summary of what you're doing, or shall I just start maybe addressing some of the questions with the vinyl windows?
Yeah, I think we'll let you take over for a while, and then we'll chime in if we have any questions.
Okay, okay. Well, thank you again. I'm the architect working on the project, and I think that for the most part, we have no issues with the conditions that Kelly has come up with. One of the problems that we find when we're doing a restoration for a project like this is there's so much that's unknown. And in this building in particular, as Kelly mentioned, when it's been modified so many times, it's really hard for us to know what we're going to find when we start pulling the finishes off. And so for the windows, one of the issues that we have is that we will have to be replacing a number of the windows on the JQ Adams side because there are currently 3 apartments up there, none of which have code legal egress windows from the sleeping rooms. And while I know that if we're not changing them, technically the code may allow us to retain those, we feel that it's a significant liability issue, and we would like to replace those windows with legal egress windows for fire and life safety. So that starts the process of, okay, how do we replace these windows? So all of the windows on that side are vinyl. Again, they're an odd assortment of sizes. If you look at the pictures, you can see, in fact, even some of the head heights of the windows are different. So once we open it up and find out what we're dealing with, we'll be able to get a better idea of what we want to do. But what we've shown on our proposal is windows that are slightly larger. We've tried to keep the proportions appropriate for the age of the building, but such that they will allow egress. On the west side of the building, again, there are wood windows there. The condition of them is not good. We would be, I think, happy, and again, Dave and Vicky can address this, to look at that when we start peeling away, the trim and everything, to see truly what the condition is and to get pricing for restoring those windows. And I think, again, if that is something that is reasonable and we can do that, I think that would be an option that we would, consider, and would be happy to work with Kelly to figure that out. So again, the vinyl windows on JQ Adams, I feel that that's a reasonable proposal, because it'll allow us to get those egress windows at a feasible, affordable, reasonable price, rather than going with the wood. As far as the vinyl clad windows that we're proposing on the front, quite honestly, those are just because the Anderson vinyl clad wood, I've used them, I've installed them in my own house. They are, I think, a great option. The vinyl on the outside, when I look at them, I can't really tell the difference between that vinyl cladding versus a fiberglass cladding versus a metal cladding. I think the vinyl material has a little bit more, flexibility and movement. But again, if that's something where for whatever reason, if the board decides that they just don't want to go with the vinyl, we can look at the Marvin Integrity. I can tell you the Marvin Integrity windows are probably going to be, I would guess, 50 to 100% more cost than the Anderson vinyl clad. But again, those are the kinds of things where once we start opening this, I feel that there is enough that's unknown that we would be, it would be to our benefit as well to work with Kelly to discuss our options once we have a better feel for what is in store. But to go through the HRB process, we wanted to present it, get your feedback and a preliminary approval, hopefully, so that we could go through and then go to the next step and prepare the permit drawings and keep the process moving forward. So I guess that's sort of our intent. With that, I'll leave it for more questions from the board, or Dave, Vicky, if you have anything that you want to add to that, or if there are any other questions, I don't know if you want me to address any of the other proposed modifications, or if we just want to focus on the windows now, but I'm open to questions from the board at this time.
I think I have like just one clarifying question. I know there's the wood windows, but are you replacing vinyl windows with, that are already currently vinyl windows? Are you changing materials that are already there on all of them or some of them? I guess I'm just.
It is kind of confusing because again, I think there are vinyl, metal and wood windows there. So the proposal is on the main level, let's see, on the storefront, that's just all old metal aluminum storefront that we're taking out, and that we're proposing as fiberglass storefront. On the upper level, on the JQ Adams side, those are all the upper level windows are currently vinyl. I believe they're vinyl replacement sashes with the existing wood frames, and those we are looking at replacing with vinyl windows. On the front, and again, and this may be, it's just something that I propose, because the front, the 7th Street facade is such a the predominant facade. I thought we could use a wood window there. I thought that would maybe have more appeal to the board because we're actually using a wood window, and so the vinyl clad also sort of had some appeal to me because it would be the same exterior material as the side. So that's what we're proposing there. On the west side, they're all currently, I believe all of them are currently the original wood windows. They're in very poor condition. So even if there's one window that's going to be required to be an egress, so we'll have to replace that with a casement window. But the other windows, again, that's where we can look at those, and until we really start to tear out the finishes and see what the condition of those windows are, we won't know the feasibility of restoring those wood windows. Again, that's something I think that the Gackleys would be more than open to looking at, and maybe meeting with Kelly and having a communication with staff to see what seems like the most reasonable option.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Can I make a comment in here, if I could?
Yes, Paul.
I applaud the owners. Number one, I applaud them for doing this because they're doing a service to the city by upgrading something that's got a high degree of visibility, and it looks like they are all heading in the right direction. That's first thing I would say. But number two is I do believe that the windows on 7th Street, the main front up above, it would be highly desirable to have them either wood or fiberglass casement windows, double hung windows that look and match up historically with what was there in size and proportion. That's the most visible side. Then the second most visible side has got to be John Q. And again, this is where it would be, again, highly desirable that they be fiberglass clad or fiberglass, but proportion is equally as important, making them have that look and feel of a casement window of the period right along that side where everybody sees it. And the side where you could get away with the most is obviously the west. That has more options as far as, people can see it coming up 7th Street. But again, it's not like somebody walking around I feel like the main two areas that they see the most will be off of 7th and John Q. but proportion and casement windows are important. And if there could be more research or more ability to try to find something that does not detract from any source. I know when I put in about $30,000 worth of windows in doing my house, it just continued to add up. And that was a major effort, just rebuilding an 1880 house. Anyway, I don't know. I just think that we should be doing, this is a great opportunity. What they're doing is so nice. It's kind of like, why should, if there's a way you can get by without cutting down to something that detracts after doing the rest of it first class, that would to me be a win-win. And again, I just feel like vinyl is, we've stepped away from it for a long time. I find it difficult to step back and put it into an approval class. Thank you.
Could I get just a clarification from you, Paul? Because you mentioned, you refer to the casement windows, and the material is one thing. And again, I do appreciate that in an ideal world, we would replace those with wood windows, and that would be our first choice as well. But the casement, so I'm assuming, again, we won't know for sure, but I don't believe they were.
I'm thinking about a double hung window where you could open it up for egress.
Okay, right. Yes, I believe that they were double hung, not casement.
Yeah, double hung, so that you can get out with egress.
Okay.
Okay. Jessica, could you provide any comment on maybe on the economic or the cost difference between the standard vinyl and the vinyl clad that you're proposing for the front? You mentioned that moving from the vinyl clad to the fiberglass clad, you thought would be 50 to 100% more, perhaps. Do you have thoughts on that?
On a normal day, I still am hesitant to try to offer too much in the way of cost estimates. And with the climate the way that it is right now, building materials are just crazy. That's something that Dave and Vicki and I have discussed too, is when they start moving forward with this, I fear that we may have some real issues with product availability. And that will definitely impact the cost. So typically the vinyl windows that they're proposing are not the white vinyl windows. That's one thing to start. They're the dark bronze or the black or the tan. So that's going to be a premium price. To go from that to a fiberglass window, again, it might be, I would guess normally that might be somewhere in a 50% cost increase versus, 100% for a wood window. But again, it's just so hard to say right now. And that's why I guess it would be great if we could get maybe some kind of conditional approval or the approval to move forward into permit drawings to continue to work with staff with the board's direction to see at the time that they're looking at, actually purchasing these windows and installing them, what's available and what the pricing is. So we could get some pricing for, for a fiberglass window, for a fiberglass, clad wood window versus a vinyl window. And then we can sort of look at where we are. Because again, and maybe in here, Dave and Vicki can chime in a little bit. I don't mean to sound, uncertain about all of this, but I feel like that when we go to do this, we may have some serious issues. The ones that we're seeing right now where things just aren't available for 3 months, 6 months, a year. So I think that's a problem that I have right now, trying to give you any real accurate pricing.
Okay, I think that's helpful. And I think that we can probably do something that will work for you in that regard to moving forward, and at least to let you go, even if in the event that we need to come back to look at the windows again, depending on what you come up with, I imagine we can separate that out.
And I think that that's fine. And again, if somehow we can get some kind of a conditional approval or whatever, because what our objective is to get an approval, sort of an overall approval from the board so that we can move forward, in good faith to spend the time to do, there's a lot of structural design reinforcing that needs to be done and the permit drawing so that we can get all of that done and move forward so that they can, in a timely fashion, start the demolition and start to open up the building and see what they have and get the process going.
Okay, great. Any other questions or comments from the board for the applicant? Okay, and then I assume we still don't have any other public comments. So assuming that's still the case, then we will close the record for public comment and move on to deliberations by the board.
I would like to see us go ahead with what was outlined by Chair to have to move ahead with the granting of approval with the condition that that they come back with more definitive product descriptions on the windows when they get to that point, and that this gets the process going, and that in doing that we just are the only, to me, outstanding point is just the windows. So as far as everything else, I love it. I love that somebody is investing like this. I think it's positive. So
I would also just like to say that I would love to see more information about the wood windows and the condition that they're in. And because I think the retention of those would be really important in my view, and for just, a historical record of what the building was and what it can tell us about that time. So.
it might be that some of us also could have that have been in this, doing this stuff a long time, can also try to access some of our old sources and see if there's something we couldn't help with as just not to enter into any dealing or anything, just be able to point you to people that might, or other options to help make this come together both physically and financially. So, that to me is very important.
Terry, any comments?
Yeah, I think I agree with both Paul and Sabrina. I love the idea and the design. It looks really cool. And I would love to see it, be able to start moving forward. And maybe, we'll explore the windows together, right? Maybe you and Kelly Reed or someone. But I think it's really important that, objects in motion tend to stay in motion. So getting something going, I think, is great. And I think it's going to be super cool too. I love the investment, and I love, you can kind of see the passion in the people doing this on all sides too, which I think is great and fun.
Okay. Very good. Yeah, I would echo pretty much all the comments so far. Regarding the windows, I guess we have a couple of choices. We could either have them come back for certain, or we could give them a kind of some boundaries and the conditions of approval that they could work within, that if they can meet those, they can move forward without coming back. But if they, if it's something that is outside of that, then they could, we're not the HRB sponsored by Marvin Integrity. So, we could say that if whatever window proposal they come back with meets the, the equivalent of that standard, then it could be approved by staff. But if they, want to move forward with a lesser window, then that does need to come back to us for later approval or something of that nature.
I would support that recommendation by by chair.
Yeah, I'll have to admit, I'm not familiar with the vinyl clad product and how close in quality that is to the fiberglass clad. But
I'd like to see it.
staff could likely be able to make that judgment if it's, on the same order of magnitude.
But proportion is still to keep it in design and appearance to be correct by shadow lines and sill plates and things like that are critical in maintaining a real nice appearance, particularly from 7th Street.
Okay. Then I guess I think would entertain a motion.
I guess I'll make a motion that we approve this plan, and I don't remember what the number was, but it needs to be said. But that we hold out for staff to approve the fact that the windows do meet our standards of our code, and if they are subject to interpretation, they should come back to the board for another review.
Yeah, I would second that motion.
Was that clear enough, Kelly?
Well, so it sounds like the added condition of approval, and let me share my screen again, that might be helpful.
That it complies with the code. Let's take a look. Okay.
Yeah, can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay. So condition 7,
Utilize fiberglass placements on the front and side.
so it sounds like we could just say shall utilize clad wood windows as replacements on the front and corner side, Marvin integrity or equivalent quality. And then if I can determine based on more information from the applicant, if I can determine that the vinyl clad is equivalent quality to Marvin integrity, then I would be able to approve it as staff. Is that, and if I can't, then it would come back to the board. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
I think that's correct.
Yeah.
Okay, so we
And I
would
think
take,
that would apply to all the windows, or are we differentiating between the front and corner and the on the John Q. Adams side?
Idealistically, it would be all windows, but I would like to hear other people's opinion.
I'm kind of along with Paul that before approving a standard vinyl window, I'd like to see it come back, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, before approving a standard vinyl window, I'd like to see it come back.
and that applies to any facade?
I believe so.
So then this condition can remain as it is currently worded. Meaning vinyl clad would have to come back no matter what.
I think the vinyl clad, if it's of a quality that's similar to the fiberglass clad, then it can be approved at staff level. But the vinyl on the side, on the Jane Q. Adams side, so if they were able to use the vinyl clad on the side and it's of similar quality to what's meets the normal conditions approval / policy on windows, then it could be approved through staff. Otherwise, if it needs to come back.
So clad wood as replacements on the front and corner side if it's Marvin integrity or equivalent, and then full vinyl windows are not permitted without board approval. Does that capture it?
I think that's perfect in my mind.
Yes.
Okay, and that the first condition, I just want to clarify the wood windows, getting a cost estimate. And then letting the applicant decide so this, as it's written, it would let the applicant decide what to do after getting that cost estimate.
That's okay with me.
I think that's okay as well. And then of course we can refer them to our grant program as well if they qualify for that.
And I realize that I have this before issuance of a building permit, but Jessica, I want to make sure that that's not going to affect the timeline. So I'm not sure if you would be pulling a building permit to get the windows out, and take a look at them. You know what I mean? Is that going to be an issue?
No, I don't think it will be an issue because we can start doing the demo work without the building permit. So we can start pulling off the finishes. So I think that should not be a problem. Again, from our perspective, and I appreciate all of this, but a lot of it was just wanting to get sort of the board approval on the overall design of, the awning and the modifications that we're making. And it sounds like there are no issues with that.
Yes.
So again, I feel like we're in a good position to move forward with the building permit drawings, knowing that aside from figuring out the windows, that we've got the support of staff and the HRB. So I think we're okay with that. Dave and Vicky, are you in agreement? Is this all workable for you? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah. Sorry, I had to click over. Yeah, we're good with that. That sounds great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right.
And so, and just in terms of the windows, if I could get just one clarification. So again, on the JQ Adams side, regardless of the material of the window, again, we're proposing on some of those to change the proportion, the size of those, to allow for the egress, and that is acceptable to HRB. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know if we need to document that or not in here, but I think that's fine. So long as they're still of a proportion that's consistent with the general design of the building. Obviously, we don't want ultra modern, large.
No. And I think, again, once we open up and because like in the front, for example, you can see from the inside the actual framed opening of the original windows. And so it is the Gackleys in objective to try to restore the windows to their original size where they can, barring the need to provide an egress window in some of the bedroom units. So, and again, if we find anything that is not, that's unexpected, we would go back and involve Kelly and have a discussion with staff to make sure there aren't any concerns.
Sounds good.
Yep.
Thank you.
No, my name.
There.
Okay, Paul, do you want to revise your motion based on the updated conditions?
I want to revise it based upon the conditions of approval that have been written that we've agreed to.
Is there a second?
I second.
I can call the vote. Board Member Crook,
I vote aye.
Board Member Edgar,
Yes.
and Board Member Ferry,
Yes.
and Chair Blythe.
Aye.
Thank you.
Application is approved with the listed conditions of approval. All right, on that note, we will move on to the next application. So we'll open the record for Oregon City file number GLUA 21-00001, HR 21-00001 through 21-00005, historic review for Kenema Cottages and the Kenema National Register Historic District. Does any board member have any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, bias, or any other statement to declare?
Yes, I'm going to recuse myself from this process as a HRB member because of previous activities associated with this development.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Carrie
I don't have any.
and Sabrina.
I don't have any.
And I don't have any either. And then have the board members visited the site?
Yes.
Yeah, I've also visited the site.
And I have as well. Does anyone in the audience wish to question any of the board members about these disclosures? Okay, then we will commence with the staff report.
Thank you, Chair Blythe. I'm going to share my screen again. We've got an application that's new construction. This is an application that the board has seen before, but many of you as board members have not. And so it's a little bit complicated, and please bear with me as we try to explain best I can what you're looking at, what you're being asked to review. So this development is a 5-unit cottage home development in the Kenema National Register District at the corner of 4th and Miller. The structures, there are a few historic homes surrounding it. We've got the Cassidy House there on the corner, another historic structure next door. Here's another image at the corner of 4th and Miller. And this development, Kenema is mostly zoned R6 single family low density dwelling district. And in 2009 or thereabouts, the city adopted a new code that allowed what we call cottage housing. We call it cluster housing now. In any of our single family zones where a developer could build small individual units with a size limitation in exchange for a greater density or greater number of units on a given size property. And so that code provision is what was used here. So it's not your typical, one home on each lot development. It's kind of one property with multiple homes with shared parking areas and shared open space. And of course, like I said, you get additional units in exchange for them all being limited in size. At the time of this approval, the size limitation, I believe, was maximum 1,200 square feet with an average of 1,000 square feet. So this is the approved site plan showing the 5 units. And I want to give you a little bit of history. In 26, so this project was initially proposed in 2016. At that time, it had 7 homes because the size of the property allowed for that many units under the cottage home provisions. So the applicant was being would be reviewed through our land use process as a cottage home development, which is a staff level review. And then because it's in the Kenema National Register District, the proposal also goes to Historic Review Board. And so the applicant's required to meet the Historic Review Board design guidelines, and then also the cottage cluster housing standards. So in 2016, the proposal came to the HRB and the board said that 7 is too many. I'm summarizing greatly here, but we can't approve 7, come back with a different proposal. And so the applicant came back in 2017 with a proposal for 6 homes. That's the modification file application that was in the agenda packet for today. So that modification file proposed 6 homes. What ended up being approved was 5 homes. So the HRB added a condition of approval saying remove house number 2 from your plan. The approval of that decision was appealed to City Commission. The City Commission, did not remand it back to the board. And then that was appealed to LUBA. LUBA did not remand it. So the city's decision to approve this 5-unit development was not remanded. And so it stood, that approval stood. And then the applicant moved forward with the staff level review for the cottage homes and the geologic hazard overlay review. So that 5-home plan was turned in. Then in 2018, late 2018, building permits were issued. Construction work began. Normally there are things that I as staff check on before building permits are issued to make sure that the plans meet the what the board approved. And then again, at the end of construction, when everything's done, as historic preservation staff, I go out again, do a site inspection to make sure that the final construction met what the board approved. And so this isn't finished, obviously, but we did some interim inspections because there were some issues about skylights that we wanted to check on and catch them earlier rather than at the very end. And so we did some interim inspections and we found that there were a lot of discrepancies between what the board approved and what has been built so far. Knowing that it's not finished and there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. So it's hard to get a clear understanding of what the site's going to look like at the end. But we flagged some items. And so here we are. I also want to point out that, because this design changed so many times, we have a lot of different sets of plans and iterations of what the houses look like, as well as how many there are and where they are located on the site. So just to show you an example, house number 5, at one point, the proposal, the drawing looks like that, and the board in 2017 placed some conditions of approval on that, which kind of resulted in a change to the windows. And so you're seeing the result there in the photo. Same with house number 2, the board said required there to be a front door on that facade of the home. And so, that front door was added. So it's going to look different. So there are a lot of changes between the drawings and between the final product, some of which were requirements from the Historic Review Board, some of which were requirements of the cottage home review, and then others were done without approval. And so that's why we're here today. All right, and I will walk through what those changes are as briefly as I can, so that there's lots of time for questions. I just want to briefly go over some approval criteria that applies to this new construction project. This is from Chapter 1740. New constructions shall safeguard the city's historic, aesthetic, and cultural heritage, complement any National Register historic districts designated in the city, promote the use of historic districts and landmarks for the education, pleasure, energy, conservation, housing, and public welfare of the city. Those are just a few. We bring in the comprehensive plan policy of preserving and accentuating historic resources, part of an urban environment that is being reshaped by new development projects. And then, of course, one of the criteria is the adopted design guidelines. And so what I'm going to talk about are those design guidelines. And so talking about kind of the character of Conema, what we're looking at when we look at new construction is, how does it fit into the district, and how does it affect the character of the National Register district? And, based on the National Register nomination document that describes Conema, these are kind of the main features of this part of Conema. There's the lower part along the river, and then there's the hillside part of Conema. So on the hillside, the character defining elements are the narrow streets and informal driveways, the basalt walls and channels, the development pattern, irregular home placement on the hillside, and then the landscape of dense natural vegetation and mature trees. Of course, as well as, and most importantly, all the historic structures in the district. And so the other part of the design guidelines I want to highlight for you, and I'm not going to read all of this text, but the design guidelines are not standards. They're not mandatory standards. And this is an excerpt directly from the document. The design guidelines are meant to describe a safe harbor path for an applicant. If they follow the design guidelines, then that's a safe path to get approval from the board. This says, yet there may be occasions when alternative designs are either desired or needed. The original development that was approved in 2017 by the board did not quite follow the design guidelines, and so it didn't go through that safe harbor. And so the applicant did extra work to demonstrate that the project still met the design guidelines as a whole, and the board approved it as an alternative design. So I want to point that out because I think that's important to understand that this was approved. Even though it didn't meet every single guideline, overall, the board found that it was appropriate and compatible. And LUBA, the Land Use Board of Appeals, affirmed that as well. So this, kind of looking at the overall development holistically, it has that irregular house placement and arrangement that you find, as a character defining feature in Conema. The homes are all 1.5 stories. They're not very tall. The design and shape of the homes are mostly kind of a vernacular style that is one of the styles of Conema. The homes have small footprints and massing. And the site development includes a combination of landscape preservation of a wetland on site and some trees, along with new landscaping. So holistically, I think these factors that you're looking at are the reasons why this development was approved in the first place and found to be compatible. Not trying to put words in the former board's mouth, but that's my understanding of why this was approved. I was not staff at the time, so. So I'm going to go into each kind of issue that we found of items that did not match what was approved by the board. And so for each of these, really I think what will be important to think about tonight is whether what we see here meets the guidelines. And if it does, the board can find that. And if it doesn't, there might be mitigation that can make up for that, mitigate that, or there might be alternatives, or maybe it doesn't meet the design guidelines and it needs to be changed. So the main question is, are the guidelines being met here for the overall development with these features? So first is siding. The guideline in our new construction guidelines is that wood siding, what should be used in new construction is wood siding or materials which have the appearance of horizontal wood siding. And it adds that not allowed is alternative board siding that does not match the approved profiles or texture. So there's nothing specific about what kind of horizontal wood siding has the appearance, or what kind of siding has the appearance of horizontal wood. That's up to you. And so what's been used here is textured fiber cement siding. So I have a close-up of that, and then this is house number 1 as viewed from the street. So here's kind of what the textured siding looks like compared to the smooth. And then of course, wood, painted wood. In the past, the board has typically, when fiber cement siding has been proposed, the board has approved that on new construction. Along with that, though, the board has approved it as the smooth version and not the textured version. To my understanding, of as far back as I know, that has been the requirement, that it be smooth fiber cement. That said, these homes are separated from the street, at least 28 feet of it. The closest is house number 4 at 28 feet. And there's ample landscaping in between the house and the street. You can see the landscaping plan here. House number 1 is also just about 28 feet from 4th Avenue, and it's also at a higher grade. So it's higher up than the street level, which gives additional distance from kind of viewing that siding up close. And of course, there's lots of landscaping that's planned in between the house and the street. Kenema is also interesting too, because it doesn't have sidewalks, and you're not walking along a sidewalk and seeing a home up close as you would maybe in McLaughlin. And so, the visual experience is a little bit different in Kenema and might lend itself to, making materials less noticeable for someone who's visiting. So next is windows. The guideline for windows and new construction is to match the member sizing, thickness, and shadow line of painted wood windows. The windows do not have to be wood. And in this case, they are actually. The applicant has utilized clad wood here. I believe it's fiberglass clad. It might be aluminum clad. Sometimes it's hard to tell. Both of those options were approved by the board, but the shadow line, member sizing, thickness, and shadow line is kind of in question here. And these are casement windows. The applicant has used casement and awning windows. So they're not double hung and single hung, and so they don't have that difference between the upper pane and the lower pane. It's kind of flat with a simulated divided light with that horizontal bar that separates the upper portion from the lower portion, but there's no difference in depth there. So I think, we're looking for board direction on whether these windows meet the guideline, and if they don't, what can be done to meet the guidelines. So here are some windows that are used in new construction that do have more of that shadow line. The brown one is one that was used, I think, on a historic building a few years ago. I don't know that it was used in new construction, but it was a replacement. And so, that has that depth and the sill depth that is characteristic of the historic windows. So as a staff recommendation, there seem to be two options. One, that the windows be replaced with windows that have shadow lines that match historic windows, or as an alternative, add some additional landscaping in front of those homes that face the street, and add a thicker outside window trim that would increase the depth of the window from the trim to the glass. That is something that's been done on, this is not a historic project, not in a historic district, and these are actually vinyl windows, but I believe this is an example of maybe some of that thicker trim. Window placement. So there are lots of windows that are differently sized and differently placed from what was approved by the HRB. That's fairly typical to have slight changes. In this project, I think every single house had at least one or two differences, and some of them were fairly substantial in where the windows were and what they looked like, what shape they were. So because of that, I think it's important just to look at the homes as they are. Is the window placement appropriate? And staff's opinion is yes. The window placement is fine. The applicant has proposed to add one window to the house number 5 side right here shown. And then I'm also showing the front of house number 5. There's a side light next to the door. That was one of the comments that we received had a question about that side light. That was approved by the board originally. And I don't have any concerns about the appropriateness of that side light in this context. So I don't have a recommendation to modify window placement at all. I think what the applicant has built is appropriate and meets the guidelines. Skylights, the reason these are coming up is that there was a condition of approval in the original HRB approval that no skylights could be visible from the right of way. And so what we found is that some of these skylights are technically visible from the right of way. What the guidelines say is that the skylights should be installed on inconspicuous roof slopes. So this board has the ability to, even though there was a condition of approval previously, because we're going through another review process here, this board has the ability to change that condition of approval and, allow the visible skylights. If you believe it is appropriate, meets the design guidelines. Staff recommends that these, because these skylights are on the sides, they're not on a street facing front roof, and therefore they're appropriate. Also because they're small and they're flat against the roof. They're not bubbly skylights, that they are not problematic. Here. There's one on house number 2 as well. That one's way back at the back of the site, behind house number 1. There will be some landscaping installed in between the driveway and that house that will likely shield that skylight. And so my recommendation is that that one is also appropriate. Retaining walls were questioned. The guideline is to minimize the height and presence of retaining walls. The final proposed wall here at the back of the driveway next to house number 1 is it's 5 feet. There were 2 conditions of approval about walls. One was to make sure that any walls in the front are limited to 3.5 feet. And then there was another condition that said any walls should be limited to 3.5 feet. I don't know if there was a mistake there, or if what the intent of the board was it to regulate just walls in the front of homes, or all the walls on the site. So I think it's worth revisiting that and making a call as to whether this 5-foot wall is appropriate. And so there's a lot more that we can talk about, but in the interest of time, I will share with you my recommended conditions of approval. I think, the board can, if the board agrees with these and agrees with the findings in the staff report, then, that's kind of a path. If the board wishes to add conditions or change conditions, we will need to have findings to go with that. And so the board would probably also need to provide the findings in support of whatever changes you might want to make to these conditions. First one is adding landscaping in front of house 4 and 5 and adding in front of house 4 and 5, adding 2 trees and 6 shrubs to increase the amount of screening from the street, so that the modern kind of window design and the siding is more obscured by that landscaping. Condition number 2 is the same idea, but for house number 1, because that's also facing the street, would add larger shrub varieties. I think the shrubs that have been proposed are kind of smaller types. So adding larger shrubs that would have a little bit more screening of the materials of that house. So the result would be especially when the landscaping matures, these houses would be kind of tucked more into the landscape and not as visible. Condition 3, so the recommendation was either 1, to replace the windows, some of the windows that don't have that historic shadow line. So if that's not going to happen, then the applicant shall utilize window trim to achieve 2.5 inches to 3 inches of depth from the face of the trim to the glass panes for the windows on the facades on that list. And so those facades are the ones that are visible from the street. That was a lot. Thanks for bearing with me, and I am happy to answer questions.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. That was a lot. I think I'm the only remaining person that was around for the first round of this. I don't know, Carrie or Sabrina, do you have any questions for Kelly?
Sorry, and I do think Carrie Richter has a little bit more to add as well. So sorry for not saying that earlier.
Okay. Yeah, we'll hand it over to Carrie then.
Okay, just quickly, I just want to add a couple of quick points that I think Kelly touched on, but I just want to reiterate them. First of all, the design guidelines are discretionary, and that's why the HRB is charged with what it's charged with doing. It's evaluating the design guidelines and determining if they're satisfied on the whole. This isn't a historic district that's significant for its siting or its window size. It's significant for all of these components working together as a whole. And so I hope that when you think about this, you think about this in terms of as a whole, do these buildings complement, contribute to the significance of the historic district or not? And don't be bound up by precedent. Just because if you were to approve patterned hardy plank on these buildings, you will not be setting yourself up for approving patterned hardy plank ever again. These are, every case is unique, every proposal is unique, every location is unique. So don't be bound by precedent. And at the same time, don't be concerned that this applicant may not finish this project or we need to get the project finished. I would view this project as a proposal before you with this application package. And so looking at it from that lens with respect to the design guidelines and nothing else. So that's just sort of my idea about how I would frame these issues as you deliberate this evening. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Carrie. I guess Sabrina or other Carrie first. Do you have any questions for Attorney Carrie or for Kelly?
No, I don't think I have any questions at the moment.
I don't have any questions.
Okay. Kelly, I did have a couple, I guess. So has there been an effort to catalog the deviations from what was approved in 2017 in whole? You know, it does seem like there is more than the things that we just talked about. Has there been kind of an effort to go back and top to bottom make a list of everything that's changed or anything like that?
Yes, we did do that. We went kind of facade by facade for each of the buildings. And the applicants, the application that was submitted does that a little bit. It includes each facade. And so in the staff report, you probably noticed that the written staff report talks a little bit more in depth about some of these items than what I talked about here in the interest of time. So yes, there are more differences. And the ones that I didn't talk about much are the ones that staff felt met the design guidelines and didn't require any changes or mitigation in order to do so.
Okay. One that particularly comes to my mind is there was the wall and there was a parking area behind house 1 that was removed and the wall moved closer to the street, you know, as well, which didn't get brought up, I guess, which was a concern of mine. So I guess one of my questions is, are there other changes that we're maybe not aware of or haven't specifically been addressed that are there? And then 2, if we approve this application, are we approving a specific list of changes, or are we approving any changes in their entirety, you know, or approving the site as it's built today, sort of, or, you know, at least within the conditions of approval, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think I'd have to take a look at the site plan and the parking. That isn't something that we looked at. But we did, so we did a pretty comprehensive look at every facade. If, you know, there are some small changes, like, you know, the front porch stair on house number 1 was originally front, you know, going down on the front, and now it's a side oriented stair. And that was something that was done in order to meet a condition of approval for the cottage home. R6 zone standards and setbacks. And so that is, so a lot of these things, you know, things that didn't really come up and bubble up to the top are items that in a normal process, you know, there are always like little small changes that occur, and staff is able to usually, you know, take a look at it and make sure that it's okay and approve it at a staff level. And so those items I didn't really highlight. So, you know, that's typical, I think, of any project, like, you know, small window changes and or window placement changes, or the stair orientation changing. So I guess it's, and then to answer your question about whether this approval would be for everything as it is, all the conditions of so the conditions of approval would still apply. So there are conditions about landscaping and final finishes, you know, like porch railings and, you know, no pressure treated wood visible, and, you know, things like that, that we don't see yet because it's not been installed. Those would still be in place and wouldn't be changed. So you wouldn't be approving anything that, you know, anything to change unless we're addressing it in this staff report or as a modified condition of approval. And you bring up a good point, Grant. I think we might need to get more specific about what's allowed to change. So I guess I can think more on that as we're talking, and I'm happy to bring anything to you kind of at the end of your discussion.
Sure. Okay. Perfect. That's helpful. Thanks, Kelly. All right. On that note, then we'll move into the public testimony portion of the hearing. Again, we'll have 15 minutes or up to 15 minutes for the applicant, 5 minutes for representatives of organizations, 3 minutes for individuals, and up to 5 minutes for the applicant's rebuttal. Additionally, I'll maybe just remind anyone that's going to give a public comment that the Historic Review Board can only really address concerns that are related to the historic compatibility of the issues. So any public comments you might have on geohazard items or on the wetlands protections, they're not items that we can really address under this board. So I would suggest you use your limited time to focus on, you know, the issues that are under review this evening. So we'll start with the applicant, I guess.
Okay, I think everybody hear me? Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about my video. There's something going on with my Zoom thing where it kind of freezes once in a while, but if you can kind of look past that. You know, this project has a long history, as Kelly mentioned earlier, and I just want to first say that the HRB right now has an amazing, between Carrie and Kelly tonight, you have gotten a really pretty thorough description of the history of the project and their recommendations on how to, what to be thinking about that's important for this decision tonight. They have a lot of really good, in my experience, they are giving you really good guidance on how to make a decision. Rather than going through a really long description of what's transpired and where we are at today, I think Kelly actually did a really good job of summarizing everything. So I'm not going to repeat again what she has said. I do want to say, just in the interest of kind of the public realm tonight, that I read all the comments by the local neighborhood neighbors. We've been working with the Kenema Historic District and the Kenema neighborhood from day one on the project very closely. And I'm very aware of the community and what I'm sensitive to the community in terms of getting the project completed, and we are committed to completing the project. So I just want to emphasize that tonight, especially for Karen Bleha, our next door neighbor to the west. She has been very patient and endured the past couple of years of construction. And, we've had some delays because of various things with weather and the geotechnical restrictions on when you can and can't build in that area. So it's been kind of a long process, but again, we're committed to finishing the project. I think it's really important to keep in mind what was mentioned earlier about the historic guidelines and kind of the bigger picture of Kenema. It's not about specific elements. It's really more about kind of the bigger picture of Kenema and do the homes fit in with the historic district and kind of the overall character of that neighborhood. That the historic guidelines are discretionary. So it's not about a specific element like a window or the siding or what the trim color is or that sort of thing. It's more about the general feel and character of the homes. And in the very beginning of the project, we did a very extensive study of Kenema, looking at all the historic, basically the entire neighborhood, and identifying historic elements and character and features of the homes. And if you go there and you walk kind of down the street and walk by the homes now, in my opinion, they actually feel like they belong there. It feels like it belongs in the neighborhood. So I personally think we've done a great job with that. We have made a couple of minor adjustments, which Kelly described earlier. So our hope tonight is that the board will see what we've built and recognize that that the homes do fit in the neighborhood really well and are meeting the sort of intent and appearance of the Kenema neighborhood. So I'm not going to go through every section of siding and windows and repeat what Kelly said earlier, but we generally agree with Kelly's recommendations on if the board tonight believes that we need to have any mitigation, that we basically agree with the city's recommendations that Kelly has outlined tonight, with the addition of landscaping and also the addition of trim to the windows to give a more depth and appearance to the windows. So I just want to conclude with saying that certainly you have a choice tonight. One of the choices is to approve the project as is, as built, we're not finished with the project yet, so we're still finishing up, and we still be complying with the other conditions of approval that are outlined. But in terms of, you have a choice tonight to approve as is without any mitigation to the current design. And that's certainly what we would prefer. But we are prepared to make those changes that Kelly has outlined and mitigate if that's the decision you'd like to make tonight. Either way, we are committed to working with you to and with staff to making the project a success for everybody and to finish the homes and get people living and families living in these homes. So I just want to reiterate that we want to work with the staff to get the project finished and move forward with the project. I did want to address briefly the wall that was mentioned just a few minutes ago at the back of the driveway on house number 1. That is a retaining wall, and it actually is, once the driveway paving is put in and everything is up to the level that it's going to eventually be at, it'll be a little less high than in that photograph that was shown. And so it's not quite as, it doesn't have quite as much visual impact. Plus it's fairly far back away from the street as well. And there's lots of conditions around Kenema where you have retaining conditions. So thank you very much for your time. I understand and appreciate your where you are and what you're doing, and I'm open to any questions you might have before you move on to the next step.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Staggs. Carrie or Sabrina, do you have any questions for the applicant?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay.
I'm just curious, we're only commenting on the things that were brought up in the conditions of approval in the report as far as retaining walls and things, is that correct?
I think anything that is a change from what was approved in 2017 would be fair game for questions or comment here.
Well, I mean, I don't really know exactly, because it was really hard to determine what was approved and what wasn't and everything. I just noticed that the retaining wall that's against the property 514 4th Avenue is it's a I-beam, and it looks like precast concrete things. It looks very precarious. I don't know if that's normal or if there's going to be something to address that. It just seems.
Can I answer that question?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's going to be a stone covering on that wall. That what you're seeing in the photographs is the primary structure for that retaining wall.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be covered with stone, and also there'll be landscaping up against that wall. So actually, if you look at, there should be a drawing in the previous package that shows that condition where you can get a better feel for it. But it's basically a stepping retaining wall that's covered with stone, and there's landscaping in those planters. So what you're seeing there in the pictures is not the final.
Okay, it's hard to tell because it's in progress. So
yeah, and the other kind of confusing thing is that there's photographs at multiple different times during the project. So if you go out there today, it's going to look much different from like some of the photographs that were presented as part of the package. So
and also on the 5-foot wall that's at the end of the driveway, is that going to have any sort of treatment to it, or is it going to remain just flat concrete?
That wall does not have any treatment on it. No.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. I guess I did have a few questions for you, Chris. So I guess, we're thinking back a couple of years, it was certainly a little bit of a painful process for us to get to, the approved conditions of approval. That was, lengthy and several months and a lot of time. I guess maybe could you speak to why some of these changes happened that were, pretty clearly outlined in the conditions of approval in the first place?
I think that is also kind of a point of confusion here, because the package that was submitted in that last HRB hearing, there were no interim packages or interim drawings that were done for the HRB to see that basically were reflections of the conditions of approval. So we went right from the application package to the permit drawings, which were reviewed by the building department and the planning department. So I think it's a little, if I were sitting in your shoes, it'd be a little confusing to kind of know what is what, because for example, every house had a lot more skylights than they do today, because we took a lot of them out because of the conditions of approval. And the skylights are a good kind of are a good example, because in the conditions of approval it says skylights shall not be visible from the right of way, which in my opinion was not an accurate reflection of the historic guidelines and standards. The standards say that skylights shall not be in a roof facing the right of way. So we took out a lot of skylights and really tried to make them inconspicuous and minimal and be very flat against the roof. But as you can see, that there are some that are still, visible from the right of way. And it's really quite impossible to not have a skylight, or to have a skylight that isn't visible from some right of way. So I think that's why the guidelines and the standards are actually quite accurate or well written in saying that skylights are not allowed on roof slopes that are facing the right of way. And so if you look at in the example of house number 2, the one that Kelly mentioned is far back. House number 2 is the house that's quite a bit set back from Fifth Avenue. That one has a skylight that's facing the right of way, but it is going to be covered with some landscaping and trees, so you won't really see it. So, going back to your original question, I think it's difficult in some ways to kind of, you can't really look at that previous package of drawings that was submitted as the application at the time that the project was approved, that the HRB approved it. So having said that, there are, like for example, with the windows, all the windows have the 2-to-1 proportion that is typical in Kenema. And in the guidelines and the standards, that is approvable. Even though it's one big window, it actually has a division in it that makes it a 2-to-1 proportion. So there isn't a specific guideline that says it has to be an actual double hung window. It's more about the overall character fitting in with the Kenema district. So the HRB could say that is an appropriate window for this project. And actually, if you look at the conditions of approval for the windows in our approval conditions of approval, on page 60, page 60, And section B, it says windows shall match the member sizing, thickness, and shadow line of painted wood windows. Windows shall also consist of the following designs: double, single hung, or casement. So, there's some discretion in that description where it says windows shall match the member sizing, thickness, and shadow line of painted wood windows. There's a lot of discretion kind of built into that. So when we submitted our plans for permitting, we had windows that we thought met that condition of approval. So I think that's the answer to your question, is there wasn't like an intent to not abide by the conditions of approval. It was really our intent to when we submitted our plans for permitting, we believed that we had a set of drawings and a building that matched the conditions of approval.
Okay. Thanks. And I guess, from my perspective, we do not normally require a final set of drawings that matches the conditions of approval. What, we would consider approved is the application with the changes in the conditions of approval, and only the changes in the conditions of approval, at least to a level of what's material, as judged by staff. So it is pretty concerning to me. I'll give you one example, which is that wall. So, if you'll recall, for house number one of the main concerns that was brought up in 2017 was that in the design guidelines for Kenema, the house placement is, to suit the existing topography and the most level lot portion, especially south of 3rd Avenue. And so, one of the concerns was that there was too much excavation to bring that house down closer to the street level. And so the condition around the retaining walls not exceeding the 3.5 feet was to keep it within the, any excavation that would require walls greater in height of that was too much change to the existing topography. So it was really, meant to bound the change to the topography to what we felt was a reasonable level within the design guidelines. And so by, changing those walls, bringing them forward and, totally eliminating that area, that's pretty concerning to me. And it's not, I don't see what drove that change, why it would be required, or what would justify that in the conditions or the drawings as, we approve.
Can you specifically point out what you're referring to for house number one?
So for house number one, the wall behind the home and to the west of the home, so I guess on the what would be the south and the west sides, when that house, one of the concerns that was brought up initially was that rather than digging into the slope, the most appropriate location for that home or placement of that home should be on top of the level portion of the lot, rather than cutting out into the slope to bring it down to street level. So for example, the Cassidy house next to it, rather than being, down at street level, cut into the slope, is on top of the kind of the bit of bluff there. And so, in the end, we allowed, that house to be brought down to a lower level, but the, constraint on there was that the walls were not supposed to be higher than the 3.5 feet. And I think we had assurances at the time that, that was acceptable and that you could comply with that condition of approval. So, seeing the changes happen is certainly frustrating from my perspective after, going through all of that.
Well, actually, the walls that are out in the front area of house number one will not be greater than 3.5 feet.
I'm only talking to the side and behind here, not the stepped walls in the front there.
Yeah, so the walls on the west property line have always been there, and they're going to be a stepping planter wall, so that the walls will not be taller than 3.5 feet. So we're meeting that condition of approval. The wall that's back at the end of the driveway for house number 1, the one that's 5 feet tall, is not in the front area around the house. So that one was not conditioned to be 3.5 feet or lower. It was the ones out around the front of the house that were more kind of visible from the public realm and in the public area that are more visible. But we are actually going to be meeting the 3.5 feet tall wall around house number 1 in the front, out by the front right away of house number 1.
Okay. And then why, so the wall behind, why was the placement of the wall moved from the original location?
Well, what's on the screen right now is a really important, actually, could you go back to that, Kelly, where we showed both the previous site plan and the current site plan? Yeah. So the plan on the left was the original application. The plan on the right is what was permitted and what we're building today. And you can see that the plan on the left had a retaining wall on that west property line, and it didn't have any planters or anything around it. But this, if you look at the plan to the right, it has planting beds and planting adjacent to that wall. So what it means basically is that it's a stepping retaining wall, a stepping condition where the wall will never be taller than 3.5 feet, and it'll have landscape in there and planting, and the wall will be covered with stone, and I believe it'll meet the original intent of the HRB back when we got approval. And that's the difficulty with, not having this kind of interim set of drawings that reflects the HRB conditions of approval. And I think what we have today, the plan on the right is a much softer and much more integrated kind of landscaping and house and but we didn't change the level of the house or make the walls taller between then and now.
Okay.
So I think your possibly your frustration could be maybe not, and I would actually encourage you to go out there and look at that condition, which isn't completely done yet, but it's you can start to get a feel for how the wall stepping down really mitigates the height of the retaining condition on that west property line. And I think in the end is gonna look great.
Okay. And so I mean, I think this image is pretty clear. The design of the area behind the house number 1. I mean, that's not just the wall in and of itself, but also, the stairs and the pathway, all of that site design changed substantially from what was approved.
Well, the parking, remember, one of the conditions of approval was that house number 2, that house there on the left property line, we took out that house and we took out all that parking, and it actually makes it a more compatible with Kenema, because instead of having a parking lot back there, now you have a stepping condition with landscaping and walkways, and it's actually more compatible now. And again, we didn't have an interim kind of design review with the HRB to show the revised plan after we took out house number 2 from the plans.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I certainly, it's difficult for me, house number 2, removing that was a condition of approval, but any of the other changes, not speaking to whether they are or are not better, they weren't approved changes, which is, in my thought, means that we do need to go back and look and approve these in the hearing this evening. I guess moving on, I did have a couple of specific questions. The item on the window trim specifically, I don't want to, set a condition of approval to add trim that actually is, more goofy looking or unusual looking, than leaving, it be if that's the case. Do you have any comments to share on, that suggested condition of approval to add thicker trim around the window to give more of a reveal there?
Kelly and I talked about this kind of in detail, and I don't think adding another layer of trim around the exterior of the windows is going to be, in my opinion, will be goofy. But I think it's a good, solution. And when you look at the kind of the dimensional thing, what the dimensions we're talking about are about 1 inch of, so adding one layer of trim around the windows, is going to put us in the realm of, one could argue that we're already in the realm of being appropriate for Kenema, but adding another layer of trim around the perimeter, if you believe that would be necessary, I think would be appropriate and would certainly be in the realm of many other houses in the Kenema area.
Okay, and then that's helpful, thank you. And on the topic of the siding, I guess one thing that I didn't see, and I guess this applies to some of the others too, is any specific, evidence or arguments in the application for why those things might be historically compatible. In the past, when we deviate from our HRB policies, generally it's helpful to, have some materials that we can kind of lean on to show why those deviations are historically appropriate, whether that be other examples within the district or otherwise of citing that's of, a similar texture or otherwise. So I don't know if you, made any of those efforts to look into those things.
Yeah, so in our application, we have some photographs of other conditions, particularly right next to our house, the Cassidy house, and also the other home that's being built just down on 5th Avenue right now that's under construction. I'm gonna have to plug my computer in. I'm sorry, it's gonna die. Give me like 1 second here. Okay, sorry about that. So, even going back to 2016, when we first started the application with the project, we did an extensive study of Kenema and in terms of proportions and siding and materials and roofs and everything. And there is a incredible variety of siding going on in the Kenema Historic District in terms of textured, smooth. So there's a lot of existing conditions. And if you look back at the historic, you look at historic homes and how they were built, it was sawn lumber. So the whole discussion about whether it's smooth or textured, in my personal opinion, that's a discretionary decision that the HRB could make. I would submit that I think both smooth and textured work in Kenema because There are many homes throughout Kenema that have both smooth and textured. In our application, we did say we're planning on using a wood siding, and we chose to use hardy cement board simulated wood siding primarily due to budget concerns about the project, which, you know, that's our reality of why we chose to use hardy wood siding. And hardy wood siding is definitely a approvable siding material in historic districts in Oregon City. So we believe we're complying with conditions of approval when we made that decision. But I guess I would just reiterate that this is a discretionary decision, and there are lots of conditions around Kenema that have textured wood siding, whether it's hardy board or natural wood. So I think there's a path to approval tonight based on what we have built. That's what is built on site right now.
Okay, thank you. Any last go backs from other board members before we move on to other comments? All right. In that case, we'll move on to public comments. Again, you'll have 5 minutes for representatives of organizations and 3 minutes for any individuals. And I'll go ahead and kind of keep loose track of that time there and keep us moving.
I'd like to make a couple comments from Kenema residents. Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead, Ron.
So Ron Beislein, I live at 716 4th Avenue. And it is very hurtful to sit here and hear Mr. Skaggs talk about the way he's built up the homes in that neighborhood when he came to us 6 years ago and said, I'm going to do whatever it takes to build nice homes, can be compliant with the codes. And as private homeowners, which I am one of them here, I spent the cost to make smooth siding because it says that in there. Even today, you saw in that previous meeting you had, smooth siding is required. It says hardy, plank, smooth siding in all the conditions of approval for the last 5 years. This house is the first house built for 12 years at Kenema, and it followed that code. I went through windows and doors. I could have gone to cheaper windows too. And I could have made, but it took money out of my pocket and my family to build something in Kenema that represents what you guys wanted in a code. Now we have an architect comes in, wants to build houses that says, well, it's compliant because I think it's compliant. He doesn't have to say. We have a code that says what it should say. And the 5 people or 10 people that have built homes in the last few years here have followed those compliance. Mr. Green's home has smooth siding hardy. It's just called architecture. His siding costs more than my siding. But I have smooth siding. And so I'm having real heartburn here, hearing, listening to him say that, hey, I've complied to the codes, and I think it's a con artist, personally. I'm personally sorry to say that, Mr. Skaggs, but I am very hurt, and I think the Kenema Neighborhood Association should also have a say into this, and there should be a convenience on this to wait till we decide what you're going to do, because personally, this is very hurtful to many people that have gone through the troubles to build a home in Kenema per the code that you guys currently have developed and held us accountable to, and even talked about tonight to the people about windows and stuff like that and what you guys want to do. So that's what I have to say, and I'm very hurtful. And my comments are there, and I think he knew exactly what he was doing, and he just said, I'm going to build what I wanted to build, I'll come and ask for forgiveness. And that's not right, ethically. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. Any other public comments? Paul Egger. State your name and address, please.
Okay, thank you. My name is Paul Edgar, at 211 Fifth Avenue, Oregon City, Kenema area.
And
First of all,
speaking on behalf of yourself or organization?
I've been a part of Friends of Kenema and was part of the appeal process as Friends of Kenema.
Thank you.
During the appeal process to LUBA, the LUBA agreed and set down that the building guidelines are actually by LUBA rules. And I would like Carrie to review that, what the ruling that came down from LUBA, because the way I understood it, they are mandatory, not discretionary. And that was from LUBA. Now, I would like a continuance of this hearing until some of these points can be identified, because that's what our attorney of record told us was part of the ruling from LUBA. Number two is I would like to see a detailed list of that Kelly talked about for each building, where we could have a chance to see each and every item that was on the list that is a variance from what the conditions of approval were. So we can just literally take a look at it, because I think that there's a lot of things there that are not just discretionary or just alterations, but they are violations of conditions of approval. Number two in this thing, I think that the siding situation has always been a standard that it was going to be smooth siding, and anything short of that is an alteration that's just unacceptable. Skylights. The skylights on house number 4 are very obvious, and I put an email in to the city back in August saying, hey, look at those skylights. And I looked at the windows, and I'm saying the windows are a single pane with of glass across it and with a little divider on it. And there's no shadow lines. There's no imitation. Those windows could be fit on any modern house. They have nothing to do whatsoever with historic design. And any way to trying to say that is to me an affront. The retaining walls were supposed to be 3.5 feet. And so if you add a little bit to it, you're never going to you'll be a foot short. And somewhere along the line, we have to try to figure this out, because these retaining walls, they move tons of dirt around everywhere. And I guess when I read the codes and what we were supposed to do, those things should not have ever occurred, but they did. And again, like you said, we can't talk about the wetland, but yeah, they filled in over 100 yards of dirt into the wetlands, and somewhere that violates the code for DSL. So we've got retaining. The skylights on house number 3 or number 4 are the most obvious one. 5 has skylights that are visible too, coming down. They're not going to be hidden. They show up like crazy, and those skylights should not be there, particularly on both sides of house number 3. And then I could not understand, and that somehow we approve side light windows along the side of the door. Never in the history of our Kenema or area have we ever had side light windows along the side of the doors on any building that I've ever seen that's been historically around. And so they should not exist. And then, then one of the first things I started thinking about, I said, the windows just don't fit. And then I saw on house number 1, 6 windows across the front of the house. That has never been anything that's compatible. So if you go down the list, one of the key things is being compatible with the historic district and not detracting. And what we have is we just have a list of things, one after another, that are detracting and not compatible design elements that make it not fit. And so it's within all of this that I would like to see, one, the continuance. I want to see that validation that that building guidelines are discretionary based upon what Luba said. And then I want to come back and see this listing of what Kelly developed for every side of every one of the buildings, including all of the fill and all of the
Well, I think that's
things.
your 5 minutes there. Thank you.
Okay.
5 minutes? Oh. Can I speak?
Yeah, we're ready for the next public comment. Please list your name, address, and if you're representing an organization.
Okay, is that me?
Yep.
Okay, my name is Linda Basinger, and I'm a long-term resident of Kenema. I'm also getting heartburn over this well. I can sympathize with Ron. But I urge you to pass this project that's on the table tonight as outlined to go forward. This original project was passed by HRB 2018. This project is on hold yet again, causing additional cost and delays to this construction project. This is what makes homes unaffordable. So we hear about this unaffordability of homes. All of these delays cost money. The building codes in Oregon City are so complex and so cumbersome that the subcontractors are very hard to follow all of these regulations. Skylights on these homes are just perfectly acceptable to the other homes that are being built on 4th. There's another home that's being built on 4th that has the same pitched roof. And those homes are there. No one is saying anything about those skylights. All of the skylights in Kenema should be the same. We shouldn't have special rules just because you don't like the project. Having smooth hardy plank on the front of the house instead of rough hardy plank should also be approved as well. We've got COVID. Did you hear about the fires that went through all this building? There isn't any smooth hardy plank. This makes it more and more harder, difficult to build. By the time you get paint on these homes, they sit 28 feet back from the road. You're not going to be able to tell if it's smooth or rough unless you're trespassing. And that's very obviously by the photos that Kelly had showed, the ones that are right up front and the ones that are at the back. You really can't tell if it's smooth or hardy plank. Another item they had on there was trim on the windows. Gosh, I've lived in Kenema for 20 some years. This is the first time I've ever heard about windows on the trims. As some contrasting paint. Let's just get this project finished and see what's happening. And that brings us to the heart of the matter here. The goalpost keeps moving on this. So again, we have Mr. Edgar, who's representing him from Friends at Kenema, which is pretty much just Paul. There's maybe 2 or 3 people completely different from the other side of the goalpost of the neighborhood association. So the builder has not been able to complete the interior homes, all of this waiting. So I just don't see how they can be holding him up since he's been working on this project since August 2018. The Kenema neighborhood gave this.
I think that's 3 minutes, Linda. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Any other public comments? All right. Hearing none, then Chris, did you have any rebuttal to those comments? You're on mute. I think we lost him maybe. So considering that, I think we'll go ahead and move into board deliberations, but if he does get back on, we'll give him the opportunity to rebut. Carrie? Yeah. Carrie Richter, did you have a comment?
So you've received a request for a continuance. And since this is the initial public hearing on this modification proposal, I think that under state law, we've got an obligation to grant it. So I'm happy for the HRB members to talk about the application and sort of start asking questions. There's a lot here, and giving staff instruction about what they want us to come back with at the next hearing. But I don't think deliberation is the appropriate. Deliberation suggests that the record's closed, and we're not going to close the record tonight because we've had this continuance request. So rather than say deliberation, I think what I prefer is, now that Mr. Staggs is back on, maybe he can provide some rebuttal, perhaps some feedback from the HRB, and then a continued hearing to a date certain that you all can discuss.
Perfect. Thanks for correcting that. I didn't mean to imply that we were closing the record. Chris, you have up to 5 minutes if you have any rebuttal on those public comments.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to respond to Mr. Bisline and Mr. Edgar's comments. The first thing is, smooth, hardy siding is not in the code. Everyone keeps, there are several people that keep saying that, but it's not true. And I think it's, we're in a public forum here. We're on Zoom, we're on the internet with a lot of people watching. And I think it's time to make some corrections to incorrect and untrue statements. Smooth, hardy siding is not in the code. It's not a requirement. It is a discretionary decision. Regarding Mr. Edgar's comments, he unfortunately continues in multiple hearings to say untrue things. For example, that we filled in the wetlands with 100 cubic yards of dirt. He has personally trespassed on our property and walked across our property many times at who knows what time of the night or day. And he knows very well that we have not filled in the wetlands with any dirt. In fact, we protected the wetlands during the entire construction process. And we've only made changes to the wetland that are approved by the Department of State Lands according to their guidelines, which, by the way, is only that we have removed the blackberry bushes that were growing in the wetlands. That's really all we've done. We've just cleared the wetlands, and we're planning on planting wetland appropriate material in that area of the site. The other untrue thing that Mr. Edgar said is that all the windows are single pane. Well, they're not. They're actually all dual glazed windows that are very good with keeping out the cold in the winter. They are energy efficient windows. They're not single pane. And I'm quite frustrated with his particularly his misrepresentations of the project, because they can have an influence on people in their decision-making process. And I think it's important for everyone to recognize that those are not true statements. They're incorrect. I obviously, I do not agree with a continuance. I don't know whether that's required because he mentioned he wants a continuance. But I certainly would encourage the board to approve what we have tonight and let us continue building our project.
All right, thanks, Chris. Okay, so we'll move on to any, I guess, discussion from the board on, so I think, I guess you missed it, while you're offline, but it sounds like we will need to grant the continuance tonight. Moving on to discussion from the board, Carrie or Sabrina, do you have any comments or thoughts on what we would like to see to better be able to make a decision at the next hearing?
Yes. So just bear with me, it's late now. I think that there's a whole lot going on here. And I think that maybe, since we have to grant the continuance, getting really specific snippets of the code that we're specifically talking about so that we can, as a group kind of look at it and have some time to think about it. And seeing what's, just really there will be important. I think if we can get that inventory of what's changed versus what's was proposed is important for us too. I would love to see something like that. I think that, I would like to maybe add to this discussion if, moving forward, how can we prevent situations like this from occurring forward, right? So maybe we do like a little self-assessment. I know I talked to Kelly Reed about it and, having pre-construction meetings and things. I think there's a lot of options that maybe we could look at. So as we look at this project, I think for the benefit of the city and for the benefit of the developers, we need to try to come up with a better way of kind of mitigating these circumstances from happening. Yeah, I mean, looking specifically at the siding and the windows and just really reading through it, I think would be super helpful for me. Yeah, I think that's all I can think of right at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Carrie. Sabrina, thoughts?
Sorry about that. I was a little interested in, because I know this is a project that we're coming in the middle of. There was so much that went on before that we're kind of catching up. But I was interested in what you had said, Grant, about do approval of these things change the approval of any changes that have been made to the site? So I guess maybe as the project moves forward, I'd be interested in knowing what other changes there are to the project from what was approved in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. So I think it sounds like there's sort of a consensus that having a more concrete list of the changes that we're approving and what changes there are and what changes we're approving would be helpful for us at the next meeting. And I think maybe there's some clarification on some of the items that would help as well. On the instance of the siding, I think what was approved was wood siding. There is a HRB policy that only allows smooth fiber cement siding in the case of siding replacement and things, but it wasn't really, that wasn't listed as a condition of approval because fiber cement siding wasn't approved on this wasn't what was proposed on this application in the first place. So there's some, maybe nuance that needs to be clarified between all the parties on some of those issues. But yeah, I think the main thing from my perspective is the, a clarification of what we're approving, and then, perhaps making sure that we limit it, that any new changes to finishes that aren't installed yet. I'm not thinking of exactly all what that might be off the top of my head, but we're not approving future deviations either from what was approved. Or if there are any additional changes to, for example, porch materials or otherwise that we don't see yet, it would be nice to have those in the application this round so that we can, be done with it in one shot and we're not coming back again when those are installed or something.
Yeah, I think, when I looked at the public comments, the written ones, we have an equal amount of people who also are concerned that, construction's been going on across their house or whatever for 3 years now. And I think that's something that, we need to keep in mind. And there's got to be a great way to create some kind of reasonable timeline that also follows codes, but give some people a light at the end of the tunnel too, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think we are bound by the normal application timelines, but yeah, I would like to, it would be nice to make a decision at the next evidentiary hearing if we can.
Yeah, if we can take this time to really thoroughly, look at this so that we're ready to, you know, hopefully make some move forward, whatever it is, the next meeting. I think that would be, you know, that's something the public has asked for. And I think we need to keep that in mind too.
Okay. I don't know, Kelly, any questions for the board on those comments or?
No, I think we have clear direction for the most part. I did want to know, so Grant, you brought up the parking behind house one. So the condition of approval originally was to remove house two. And so something had to go in its place, right? And so there was a lot of landscaping, and then I think the parking was revised because there were fewer homes, not as much parking required. Is that change something that you feel the board needs to review as part of the next hearing? I think because from our perspective, the replacement of parking lot and a footprint of a home with the terraced landscaping and pathway was similar enough to like other site elements that the board approved. And so we didn't think that it needed review by the board. And if that affected the retaining walls in some way, I think that was not clear. And so, yeah, I just wanted to know if that's something that the board wants to discuss, or if that issue can be, you know, I guess excluded from the hearing next time.
In my mind, because of the nature of the application, the siting of the homes, the topography, and the walls were a major element of the review initially. So any changes to those items, I would generally feel are material and would need to be reviewed. You know, in this case, that wall moving, you know, was it, you know, I don't know, 15 feet closer to the right of way, those sort of things. So,
Okay. Our next regularly scheduled hearing would be March 23rd. That is the week of spring break. So I just want to make sure that before we continue to a date certain, that would be doable for everyone. I'll be here.
I'll be ready March 20th.
March 23rd is fine with me.
yeah, that works for me as well. So on that note, I guess I would entertain a motion to move to continue the hearing to a date certain of March 23rd.
I have a question, Mr. Blythe. Is the public record still open?
Yes, the public record is still open for additional public comments.
Okay, I have a question.
Procedural questions, I think, are okay, not commentary at this time on the application.
Yeah, it's a procedural question.
Yep.
And it's a question for Carrie Richter. So Carrie, is it correct that anybody in the public comment world tonight can ask for a continuance, and that continuance must be granted?
That is correct.
Okay.
197763 sub 6E. That's the state law.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, Carrier Sabrina, do you have a motion to continue the hearing?
I second it. Or do I say the motion or apologize?
Yeah, generally speaking. Yeah, you can make the motion.
Oh, I make a motion to continue this hearing on March 23rd.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, board member Crook,
Yes.
Board Member Ferry,
Yes.
Chair Blythe.
Yes. All right. Moving forward, is this is a public hearing on the mural?
Yes, if you are going to advise, or if the board is going to make a recommendation to the city commission on a new HRB policy for public murals, then we need a public hearing to do that. If so, but you know, the board has the option of making that recommendation tonight, or you know, if you feel you don't have enough information, then you don't you know, you don't have to, but there you go. So yes, it would be a public hearing, I suppose.
Okay. In that case, we will move on to the public hearing for the new HRB policy for murals in historic overlay districts. I don't think it's not an application, so I don't think the ex parte contacts or site visits apply. And we'll go to staff report.
Thanks. I'm going to, so we have Matthew Weintraub with our economic development department here. And Matthew, did you want to share your screen, or I have some content ready if you want me to pull it up?
If you have it ready, that works great for me. Yeah. Contrary to popular belief, I'm not down on the North Umpqua River, so I can share my screen. The background behind me.
Okay. So I'll just start off by saying that Matthew is going to share our the proposed kind of mural program for the city, and HRB is involved because murals might be proposed in the historic district or on a historic designated structure or landmark, and you know, generally if that happens, HRB would review that, and HRB policies allow for staff to review certain things. So if there are projects that can meet the HRB policies, then staff level review is allowed instead of HRB review, which kind of saves everyone time and lets the HRB focus on bigger projects. So we like to adopt HRB policies where we can to allow people to make compatible changes to their properties in an easier manner with staff review. So knowing that murals are most of the time just paint, and we typically don't regulate paint on historic buildings. Murals are a little bit different than just a repainting, but you know, it's not a permanent change typically. And so knowing that, we thought that the HRB might want to adopt a policy which would allow some murals to be, in some cases, to be reviewed at a staff level. So Matthew is going to explain the mural program, the draft program that is going to be going to the City Commission for approval this spring. And then we have two options for you to consider as the HRB policy for murals. And so I will let Matthew take it from here. And Matthew, what I have is the maps and I have the flow chart. So if you want either of those, just holler at me.
Okay, Great. Thanks so much, Kelly. Yeah. I'll give a little bit of background here for members of the HRB. I know a few of you were at our December 10th meeting where we talked about this and gathered a bit of feedback that we hopefully provide clarity here. So a bit of background. City staff have engaged with community members starting really in 2014 on this issue. Laura Turway worked on that process. And then over the past couple of years, we've had robust community engagement around a desire for an increase of public art in Oregon City, and specifically around murals. Or as you'll see, original art murals. Key wording there, meaning that they are original pieces of work, not replicas or copies. In September of 2019, I guess I should actually say 2020, the City Commission directed staff to prepare a piece of draft code that would allow for the painting of these original public art murals on buildings around the city, specifically due to the engagement of the Oregon City Tourism Stakeholder Table. And so with kind of an eye towards driving greater visitation and awareness of an increase of public art in Oregon City, we've kind of prepared a suite of materials that would support it, including draft code, which is attached to your packet, a proposed set of zoning districts where original art murals will be allowed, program guidelines as well, and as a series of, I would say, public art enthusiast or potential artist or property owner facing guidelines, infographics to distill down how someone can apply for a permit and be allowed to paint public art on their building. And kind of as Kelly mentioned, the crux of it is understanding how that interfaces with our historic buildings, our historic communities in Oregon City. I guess I would like to hear feedback from the Historic Review Board on the proposed code itself, and also the potential options. Kelly, I'd love to, if you could show folks the two maps side by side. I guess that's like number 3 there. Yeah. This is where we are proposing to allow murals to be permitted, mixed use downtown, Willamette Falls, Willamette Falls downtown district, mixed use corridor, 1 and 2. That's where the majority of our, I would say, retail and commercial activity and visitation currently occurs, or hopefully will occur as well. And then the two options, I think, beyond just having them in text, I think there's a flow chart here. We're able to go to that slide, Kelly, or I can also, oops, I can't share it. Yeah, so option 1, this is what it would look like if a mural application site is not a historic structure and not an historic district. Staff meets with the permit application, and then the Oregon City Arts Commission would review the application. Same if it's within a district but not a historic structure. And then your option there, if it is on a historically designated structure, staff still meets with the applicant to make sure all their application materials are in a row. And then HRB would review that application for compliance with our historic guidelines. And HRB would have the ability to either approve it or deny it, similar to any review process. If it's advanced and it approves, then it would still go to the Arts Commission for review. The second option there, do we have that on? this one, or I have it up here. I have it up in I have a one as well. There we go. The second one streamlines that. So obviously it's the same with if it's not on a historic structure and not in a district, and not on a structure, but in a district. But then we're asking for potentially the other option there, right, is staff applies that designated waiver and determines compliance with historic guidelines. I think it's also important to note, sorry, Kelly, making you jump around here. Right, is it on the maps? We have a map too that kind of shows where some of these, there we go. Yeah, they're on the right. Kind of shows where historically designated structures are within those zones. I think it's also important to note that the majority of those are single family households or houses, which would not be eligible for murals under the proposed code, which you can see in your meeting packet. So I'd love to have folks keep that in mind. But with that, I will pause to see if there's any questions from the HRB.
No questions from me.
Yeah, I don't have any questions.
Can I make a question? I don't think I see anything in the Kanema Historic District. Is that correct?
That is correct. Right now these are the municipal zoning districts that we are proposing to permit murals in. But obviously, if we hear differently from whether it's HRB, Planning Commission, or City Commission, staff could implement those recommendations.
The only area that I see is there's a little area up above the falls or there, and I believe that is in Kanema Historic District. It may or may not be, but Falls View Tavern is in the Kanema Historic District, and maybe even Stillhouse is based upon the way the map is drawn. But I don't remember exactly looking at the map. I may have to go over and take a look at it. But we do have an area upright in that area that's part of it. And the only thing I would say is that in a historic National Register Historic District, everything is landmark. Everything. So it's not. It does not mean just a building.
So I think that area is in the mixed use corridor on here.
Those buildings are in the Kanema Neighborhood Association boundary, but
they are in the Kanema district.
They're in the historic district, and they're not designated as landmarks outside of a district either.
But if they are in the Kanema Historic District, they all have basically have landmark status because it's a landmark district.
That's correct, but the district boundary doesn't stretch over to that area. They're within the neighborhood association boundary, but not the district boundary.
Okay, not the district. Okay, that's fine.
I don't know if any of the off 99, like where the little car dealership is, and if that would potentially.
Yeah, so those are that's the historic commercial zone. And so right now the proposal is just to include the mixed use zones and but there are other zones like institutional zone where there are a lot of like city buildings and church schools mostly and like the historic commercial zone there along 99 in Kanema that if we hear from the community that those are attractive places for murals, then that could be added to the map.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Just wanna.
So I'll just go to the policies again. So option one,
you, Kelly.
for the HRB policy would allow public murals in a district, but not on a designated structure, to have no review, essentially. And mural, if a mural is placed on any part of a designated structure or landmark, the board would review that. Even if it were on the back or the side of the building, the board would review anything on a designated structure. And of course, you know, if we're bringing in Kenema, Kenema would, you know, like Paul said, any structure in that area would then trigger HRB review. Option two allows for a little bit more staff review. So public murals on non-designated structures don't require review. And then if a public mural is proposed on a designated structure or landmark, staff will review it against the design guidelines, as long as, and staff can approve it, as long as the mural doesn't cover or obscure architectural features of the building. The mural is located on a secondary facade, and that installation and removal of the mural will not adversely affect the structure. And then if the mural does not meet those three bullets there, then HRB would have to review it. So either of these are fine. And if you want to recommend either one to the city commission, the process would be that the city commission would adopt this new HRB policy along with the mural program code.
I think it
Yeah.
looks
Thanks
good.
for that great summation, Kelly. Yeah. Sorry, Paul. Yeah.
I think it looks good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you? Yeah. I guess, are you saying option one or option two looks good?
I like option two.
Yeah, I guess before do we need to, I guess I don't think we have any public comment. If this is a public hearing, do we have any? We need to,
None were submitted.
I only see Ron and Linda still online. All right. Well, hearing nothing, I'll assume there's no public comments then, so we can deliberate as a board, I guess.
And I'll add that last time we talked about this, you asked what other jurisdictions do, and I did. So Milwaukee, they have a mural program. I don't know how many historic buildings they really have, but they don't. The program is not available to historic designated structures in Milwaukee, so they just don't even consider murals on historic structures ever. And then in Hillsborough, they would generally send if a mural were on a historic building, it would go to the board. But I don't think they've had any proposed at all. So they haven't experienced that.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks. Yeah, I think sounds good to me. I think I favor option two. Generally, I think more staff review is good. And
I agree that I prefer option two. I think that that's a good option.
Yeah, I like option two as well.
all right, then do we make a motion to recommend that or to adopt option two as the HRB policy for public murals?
I move that we recommend option 2 from the HRB.
Yeah, I'll second that motion.
Okay, I'll call the roll. Board Member Ferry,
Yes.
Board Member Egger,
Yes.
Board Member Crook,
Yes.
and Chair Blythe.
Yes.
Great. Thank you all so much. We are on the agenda, just for folks to know, for the City Commission work session next Tuesday evening. And while we've already submitted our staff report and our packet there, we will communicate this as well as part of the presentation. So just let folks know, and then it'll get included into the overall package as well. So just let folks know about the process there. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew.
All right. Have a good evening. Thank you. And also, thank you very much to Kelly and Laura for assisting on this in this process. I really appreciate the work there.
Right.
Have a good night.
So that concludes the public hearing portion of the agenda. Any communications?
Oh, I do have one. The compatible change survey is live until March 8th, next Monday. So we extended it because people were had no power and no internet for a while. And so we want to give people an extra opportunity to take if they didn't attend the online open house, they could take the survey online and kind of do a virtual offline online open house. So that's up on the website, and we have some responses. So we're reaching folks, and we're planning to have this on your next agenda. So we'll share the results of the survey with you later this month. And then we can move forward with potential code changes. And for those of you who are new and don't know what I'm talking about, you can check out the website or just wait until next hearing and we'll explain everything.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Kelly. Anybody else? Anything? Last call? All right, then we'll adjourn at 9:53 p.m.